Welcome back to Holiday Hot Takes. Let's get to it. Magic Martin 666, the Nerf Dart Tag Swarmfire is the greatest blaster Nerf ever created. This is a hill I will happily die on. I mean, that's a hot take right there, and that's some dedication. I can see the appeal. I don't know if I'm gonna push back on this. I think it's a really good, user-friendly blaster. I think you can kind of give that to almost anyone, and it's just really intuitive to use. I wish they made more stuff like that nowadays. That seems like the easiest thing for all ages, right? Austinite 2684. The hobby is teetering on the edge of some kind of major injury of a child getting national news coverage and could spell the end of public play. This is not a hot take, unfortunately. I think this is very real. We're entering some fun topics, FYI. Woohoo! Get ready. I keep this in the back of my mind all the time. You know that when you see Nerf in the news and it's not about a new release that's going to blow you away, it's 9 times out of 10, you're just like, oh no, what happened? Oh, Orbeez challenge. Okay, that's kind of separate. Someone wasn't wearing eye protection, or, God forbid, something worse involving oh, I thought that was a real gun, and things get a little bit hairy and dicey. And I know people are well aware that there are different levels of oh, but that's a toy. Obviously, because even this airsoft gun, that's a toy. The general public, they don't know what some of these Nerf blasters are capable of nowadays, and what am I even saying? It doesn't even matter. Some of these things that are low powered, all it takes is for one of those to be misrepresented. That's why it's always important to vouch for safety, wear eye protection, and when it comes to events, make sure it's pretty obvious what's going on. From Silly Butts, the slow creeping in of firearm designs and aesthetic into the hobby and homemade blaster scene is dangerous and morally wrong. We play with toys, and making toys look like firearms, replica builds, full black paint, etc. not only hurts the general public perception of our hobby, but is also dangerously legal, see Australia, and dangerous for each individual. Don't get shot by the police because you wanted a realistic blaster. It's idiocy. Instead of making our hobby into airsoft, just go away and LARP with your buddies in airsoft. Give us back our bright colors and funky shapes. From Lightning Eagle 14, all black and realistically painted blasters and loadouts should just be banned everywhere. And from Willis 00788, brands should make less Milsim style pro blasters and more goofy and fun pro blasters. Also, just more goofy and fun blasters in general, including the ones classified as toys. Yeah, the last one. Alright, back on the more serious stuff. Kind of what I spoke to already. Obviously, this is a hot take because for some people, this kind of contradicts why they got into Nerf. In 2024 going into 2025, there's so many different avenues at which people find Nerf and why they want to play with toy foam dart blasters. For some people, it's oh, I like guns. These are Nerf guns. I'm going to play with Nerf gun now. I can make it look more realistic like my real gun or like my airsoft gun. And so they see the similarities and they want to match something like that. But there's also people who find Nerf from the toy route. They're like, oh, this isn't gun. I like that this is toy. This is less serious. I can get all ages in on it, and it's a little bit more safe, and it doesn't have to be playing with something that looks like a firearm. Those are just two examples, right? But those two will clash. And we always will see examples of ideas like that clashing online. In person, it's a little bit more dependent on where you live, because in some cases it's just nope, you're not bringing that at all, period, end of story. But in some parts of the country, yeah, people can bring out blasters that look a bit more realistic and it's not going to be a problem. And some people bring out more realistic stuff because they just happen to be in a setting where more people are playing with blasters that look like toys, and they can kind of hide it in the crowd of people. It's oh, that's obviously a group of kids and adults playing and it's not a big deal. But still, yes, that can be picked out and be the reason why someone calls the police on you. I know that this is a touchy subject, and I know some people are going to have strong opinions, and frankly, opinions that will not budge on this. I personally have access to something like airsoft or paintball if I so choose. If I want to play more like that, and I want to play with realistic looking stuff, I could go do that, and I could kind of very much put Nerf in a different category as a result. I can see Nerf and the reason I play Nerf for what it is, toys, but I do have to acknowledge that there is a firearm aesthetic to it no matter what. I just choose to try and keep it as separate as possible. I try to use the terminology that will keep that safe and will be keeping others as safe as possible. but I know that there's always going to be a little bit of that there. And here's a flip side argument from Mainstay. We need historical reenactments using foam flinging blasters, especially with all the 3D printed stuff coming out, like the flintlocks, muskets, etc. So like, I guess, is that a hot take? I'm sure. Like, I can see when people 3D print like their own like old school style like guns, and again, like, it matters where you're doing this too. You'll still get eyes on it that aren't from that area that will inspire people that maybe shouldn't be trying to replicate that. It's like, yeah, maybe not great, but like a musket's kind of big and obvious. So like, I can see in some cases how you can get away with it, but yes, overall, I don't understand people who want to just dump a coat of black paint on their blaster and take it out to an event. And I am talking to kind of a US-based audience here in that case, because if I look across the world, who am I to judge because I'm in a completely different country and talking from different laws? This is always going to be a divisive topic, and it's really going to depend on who you talk to and what's the context, but overall, like, for my channel and what I try to publish to the world, I try to keep it as toy-friendly as possible, not kid-friendly. You know, we find the happy medium. This is not made for kids. If you want to go play with something more realistic, yes, I do encourage people to explore options that are better developed, like airsoft or even paintball. And that's not a mean thing to say. I think if you like that aesthetic, the stuff already exists. Fun comments inbound. From Luki Anello 6190, as much as designers like Silly are doing amazing work, I dislike that almost every new must-have blaster is something that is 90% 3D printed. I just want to modify something from a brand like Nerf or X-Shot, and that's becoming harder to do as time goes on. As a hot take, disagree with that last part. It has never been easier, in my opinion, to modify stuff on store shelves, assuming that it's not solvent welded shut and missing screws. It's never been easier to look back on an old blaster and be like, can I improve this? And have like a litany of options for, oh yes, I can actually make this better. Cool. Modding is alive and well. You can still do that. Now, as for 3D printing has become very outspoken for hobbyists, so I very much agree on this one. I've kind of taken the approach of stepping a little bit away from using 3D printed blasters myself, at least to a like extreme level, because yeah, I don't have a 3D printer, so it doesn't make sense for me to own too many 3D printed blasters. It kind of makes sense to have a printer if you're going to be supporting those kinds of blasters. It's also a hobby in its own right, so you need to be invested in the 3D printing world if you're going to own that stuff. And I know, yeah, some people very much intertwine 3D printing and Nerf, but they are important to kind of have like individual knowledge sets of, because yeah, if you're just getting a 3D printer to make Nerf stuff and you don't know anything about that printer, you're gonna have a bad time. It's gonna become a paperweight in a couple months if you're not taking care of it. But I can also see why people are so excited and outspoken about new 3D printed offerings, because people are just making new stuff that they wanna make. People are like, oh my gosh, now I can make this and I can print this, and other people are selling it, and it's like, it's exciting. So it's just very easy to get excited about new 3D printed offerings, especially when those people who are making it are the ones that are like running around saying like, hey, have you seen this before? It's not just like you're talking or hearing from a company, you're hearing from the person. Hissinger889, this hobby is one of the cheapest to get into, but it can get expensive really fast if you don't invest in a 3D printer. Yes, see previous comments. Not a very hot take. I think one of the best things, yes, about Nerf in the past was that like, yeah, you can buy a cheap blaster and modify it with cheap parts, and you'll do just fine. And if you want to go even further, you can roll the dice and go thrifting and get a really cheap blaster. And again, modify it with cheap parts and have a good time. Or just buy it there and it'll work just fine too. But yes, the introduction of 3D printing at mass scale to this hobby has allowed the prices to go up a bit faster. But I think even before 3D printing, there were ways that you could start spending money real fast in this hobby. There have always been ways that you can drop hundreds, if not thousands of dollars on exclusive blasters. Like really good modifications, paint jobs have always costed a pretty penny. So 3D printed blasters have sort of accelerated that if you know where to look, but I think we've always had some expensive offerings if you wanted to spend some serious money. Icarus521, hot take, running crazy amounts of ammo and full autoing every zombie you see makes it really hard to want to play zombie early game, HVZ specific. That shouldn't be a hot take, but for some people, yeah, I guess it is. Also, Quick question, what was your last HVZ experience? Was this comment written immediately afterwards? Because it feels very targeted. HVZ just kind of balances itself out. If people are just full autoing and, you know, dumping mags on like one zombie at a time, they will run out of ammo. That said, yeah, we should say, you don't need to like dump a bunch of darts on zombies. I know sometimes they don't feel it. It happens, it's in the heat of the game. Conserve your ammo, be smart, don't mag dump. Hoeni 2000, hot take, modding blasters such as the Vulcan to be useful enough to run at HVZ level games nowadays is still more fun than adding the third boring spring spacer to a prefabbed pro blaster like the Tryon. The gimmicky fun of mods seems almost completely gone, replaced by an overdone and boring, just buy a Nexus Pro and some springs. Who would ever say something like that in jest? This is a hot take, of course. I gotta revisit the putting your third spring spacer into a prefab Tryon for HVZ? I sure hope not. That's a little bit too powerful. But I get the idea. I think HVZ though is a place where you do still see some unique loadouts. You do see people bringing the fun stuff. And I love when people get serious and excited about the themes, so they make a blaster and an outfit, you know, to fully match their loadout that will fit the aesthetic of the game that the mods have designed. So sometimes that will lead to a blaster that's not super practical. It's just goofy and funny, and I love that. You'll always have the people running around with a handful of socks, and you'll probably still have people with proton packs. But I think that HVZ has its own identity where people still do really try to bring out the fun and goofiness, and that is a cornerstone of what makes Nerf silly, at least like our hobby events. Blue Boy 9959, we need some sort of definitive organization for local or college events. It would make it a lot easier to start clubs in areas where none currently exist. It's not really a hot take, it just would be convenient. Many have tried and many have failed. Or I shouldn't say failed, they've just failed to keep up. It's the hardest thing to do is like, yo, you can start something and gather a bunch of information and then it just gets outdated really fast, and if you don't have people who are constantly paying attention to it, it goes away. Double L1862, FPS is a bad metric to judge a blaster's performance. Force and distance are much better, though harder to measure. And Bulkhead Bry, there needs to be a different way to measure how fast a projectile can fly for games. 100 FPS half dart hits differently than 100 FPS Mega XL, and split FPS caps are cumbersome. Okay, is this a hot take? I think people get upset about this all the time, but we still haven't had an official like decision to move forward with it that isn't just like FPS. Split FPS caps have worked all right, but yes, they are cumbersome and they vary depending on who you talk to and where you look at. So many of these FPS caps have just existed because over time they just became the established standard, but we shouldn't let time be the dictator of like, oh, it'll work itself out, don't need to worry about it for now. People want to know. It's a safety thing sometimes too, because yes, when we're talking about like Mega or Mega XL, you don't want those things to necessarily be the same FPS cap. I don't know who though is going to be the official decision maker on that stuff. Every club, every group seems to do their own thing. You know, some groups talk to each other, some events talk to each other. I know a lot of people are looking into this, but I don't know when the official Nerf Council will release their guidelines, when John Nerf will kind of descend from his Hasbro throne and be like, thou shall use this FPS for this event, and this FPS for this dart blaster, and XYZ. But I agree, I would also like to see this refined over time.